Hello, welcome to module 17. In this module, we're going to discuss 3 different techniques for testing. We're starting from system test, followed by acceptance test, and then usability tests. Okay, so let's get started. So let me remind you again about this pyramid, testing pyramid. So according to my cone, test pyramid must have a big fundamental of unit test, and then followed by the smaller amount of integration test or service test, and the smallest amount of the UI test. And Google also showed that they have 80% unit test, 50% integration test, and only 5% end-to-end test or system test. Okay, but today we're gonna talk specifically about this part in the pyramid. So based on this V model, we have moved up from unit test to integration test in the last module. And now we're gonna move to this level of system test where you check the system spec, you check the software according to the system specification, and you make sure that everything is integrated fully into the system and it works correctly according to the requirements. Okay. So today we're gonna discuss system tests, acceptance tests, and also discuss some kind of usability tests as well. So if we compare between system tests, acceptance tests, and I add one more thing, which is a regression test. The system test checks for the correctness and completion of the software. And this correctness and completion is based on what is specified in the requirements, right? And the test that we do for system test is that the developer is the one that do this kind of test. So it's still verification that the developers themselves are the one that do this kind of test. So it's still considered as verification. For acceptance test is the actual test that you test for the usefulness of the system and satisfaction of the users. Okay, so this one actually involve the users and it must test with the test group with users, and then it considered as validation, not verification. Okay, the last type of test is a special one. It is called a regression test. So for a regression test, we do it when we have some accidental changes or even some planned changes, and it performed by the developer itself. It's considered as a verification. So what is called regression test? It is when you have the software and you change the version from version 1 to version 2, and we want to make sure that whether version 2 works correctly according to the existing functionality that it already can do. So if you have a test set T1, right, you would run that test set with the new version of the software. And then if the test passes, that means the new version doesn't break the existing functionality. And then you add a new test case for the new version that you created. And then you have the new test set T2. So we keep doing this. If you have the new version V3, you test it with the existing test suite T2 that we have, and that is a regression test. And then if everything is okay, we can add a new test, and then we get the new test suite T3. So we keep doing this, and regression test is a way that we can ensure that the new update of the system doesn't break the existing functionalities that the software already have. Okay, so we're gonna move on to the concept of system testing. System test is a comprehensive test. So you check the whole system. The system must be up and running. Everything must be fully integrated, and it works just like the final version of the software that you are gonna deliver to the customers. So this kind of test is based on the specification of the observable behavior. So this is some external behavior. You don't check about the code anymore. You look at how does it behave from externally outside and how the user actually see those behaviors, right? And this is still a verification that we check with the requirements. And this can be either independent or non-independent. We're gonna talk about this soon, okay? But if it's independent, that means we're gonna have another team which is not involved in the development of the system to be the one that tests it. This is to avoid some errors that might occur because of the development team are the one that actually design and develop those systems. They may have some bias, or they might overlook something that the other people might easily spot. So this is called independent V&V. So independent V&V, or verification and validation, is a strategy that a company can do in order to maximize the independence of tests. And especially it will be done for system tests, and it's performed by another different organization. So you have these kind of third-party company that comes in and help you doing this kind of system tests. So it's outsourced to another company, and this is done especially for some critical system. And the outsource, it provides this kind of confidence that although they are not the developers that develop the system, they still say that your system has passed such requirements or specifications. So it's a stronger version of system test compared to the one that the developer is doing by themselves. Okay, but these organizations that do independent V&V are not the real customers, so it's still considered as verification anyway. Okay, especially nowadays that we have AI system, we need this kind of independent V&V more and more, because the law like EU AI Act, it says that the high risk AI system must be assessed by external bodies, right? So this kind of independent V&V is needed if you have a high risk AI system. But what about if you cannot do that, but you have your own company and we try to do this kind of independent V&V, at least to some certain level? You can still do some kind of independence by doing, first, we develop the test case early on, right? So you can write the test based on part of the requirement spec. So that means the test is created even before the code is written. And then now there's no bias that the code is written in some certain ways, and then you do some tests, right? Or you can use some agile methodology or some V model that design the test case before the implementation. Okay, so this kind of test first, test-driven development will be important here when we want independence of the test from the system. And nowadays, we do a lot of incremental testing because we have the concept of continuous integration, right? So your system can be integrated very frequently, like at least a day. And the system test can also be done very frequently as well. If we do this kind of thread, right? So the thread integration approach, you would integrate the system based on the functionality that are created. So each integration, you will have one functionality that works, and then you can do this kind of system test for that specific functionality. So any feature that got fully implemented, you can apply the system test right away. Okay. When we do this kind of system tests, we are testing some properties that can be only observed at the global scale. So the system properties are something that are pretty difficult to do at the tiny level. You must have the full system built first so that you can observe. For example, the property of performance, latency of the system, reliability of the system. This thing cannot be fully assessed if you have just a part of the system being developed, right? So these kind of global properties, we need the full system to do. So the major focus of system tests is that it's the part that we can verify these kind of global property against the actual system spec or the non-functional requirements that we have. Okay, this also includes security, speed, performance, compatibility, accessibility, so on and so on. Okay, all right. And also it's a part that we use to find some unanticipated effect. So you might spot some kind of performance bottleneck, security issues, so on and so on, that are not expected during the implementation. And some property actually depends on the system context and the system use. So for example, the performance property depends on the environment that it is installed. Okay, so the environment can be operating system, the hardware spec that it used, so on and so on, and some kind of configurations of all the parameters like database configuration, so on and so on, or other tools that you need to use. So these kind of performance are depending on how the software is being installed, and it can be checked only when we do system tests. Another thing is something, for example, privacy needs the full system, because the privacy depends on how the data is collected and how it is kept and represented to the other users. So this kind of thing, like for example, the medical records must be protected against unauthorized use. And this can be checked when we have the full system. Okay, so this kind of property are being difficult to do in other levels. So one aspect of the system test is we can do usability test. So usability test is checking whether the product is good, usable, and it is a pleasure to use or not. So a usable product should be easy to use or quickly learn, right? So this is easy to use. It should allow the user to work efficiently. So the UX must be easy for them to work easily. So this is user experience, right? And it also a pleasant to use. So this is something about the UI. It must be beautiful and a pleasant when the user using it. And when we can define some of the criteria that we want to use for measure such usability. We can measure the time and the number of operations that is needed to perform a task, or the number of errors that might occur. Okay, so we kind of measure this along the way when we do the test. And we also ask for their satisfaction as well, whether the user actually satisfied using our software product or not. So the flow of information when we do usability testing is as follows. You are the facilitator of the session. You recruit a participant. So first, you give the system to them. You give them a task to do, okay, with the system. So the performance, the participant perform that task using your system. The facilitator is the one observe how the user is doing the task using your software, and the participant can give some feedback back, like live during they use the system or right after they have finished the task. And then the facilitator can do some follow-up interviews to understand something in a more specific details. Okay. So in order to verify this kind of usability, we must actually test with the real users, right? And when we test with the real users, this is an activity that is validation. And we should do this in some kind of the usability lab, because you can observe them and you have some kind of special devices that record the video of the test and so on. Okay, so we can also kind of separate this to each specific part. So if you don't want to do the usability only at the end, we can split them, and then we kind of do validation and verification throughout the project. Okay, but when you do it by yourself, then it's still verification, right? And at the end, you still need to do it with the users anyway. So the kind that we do this kind of factoring of usability tests is that when we do validation, the actual validation, we're going to do in a usability lab. And the usability lab will help us to observe how the user use your software, so on and so on. And we establish some kind of the usability checklist to check whether the user passed such checklist or not. And you can do this kind of usability test early on by doing some kind of a cardboard mock-up prototype or some mock-up of the UI. And then you just get the feedback from the user very quickly. A tool, something like Figma, is a pretty good tool for now that you can use to build this kind of mock-up design, right? But If you want to also do usability when you are doing by the developer themselves or the tester, so you still rely on those usability checklists, but we do the inspection of the usability by ourselves. So at least we still use the same checklist, but the person that checks are the developer teams themselves. There are many types of usability tests that we can do. You can do exploratory testing, which is we let the user play with the software and allow them to do anything. So this is for us to see the mental model of the users, to understand how do they think, how do they use the software, and how they interact with the UI and everything that the software has. And this can be done early on to guide the design of the user interface. The second one is called comparison testing or A/B testing. So for A/B testing, you have two options. Okay, so you have software version A, and you have a newer version of the software called version B. When we do A/B testing, we're gonna deploy the version A to some of the users, and we also will deploy version B to also some of the users as well. And then you have some kind of measurements to make sure that we can compare them. So we check for, let's say, you might check for how long the users stay on a page. That might be a measure that shows how interesting is this page to them. So with this kind of two versions, A and B, and when you get the measurements, you can compare them, and then you can decide which version is better, and then you choose that version for the next release. You may have seen some of the softwares nowadays that they do this kind of A/B testing. For example, ChatGPT, when it gives you the result, you might see that some of them sometimes might give two results at the same time. And then it also asks you which one that you like more. So that is a kind of A/B testing. And the last one is usability validation test. So it's the one that the user use the system and assess the overall usability of the system. Okay, so the measurements can be what we already discussed, the amount of error rate or the time to complete such task. One tool or one measurement that we can use to help us in the usability test is called System Usability Scale, or the SUS score, SUS score, which is invented by John Brook in 1995. The SUS score helps us to measure the efficiency of the system, which means how fast somebody uses the product. The second one is intuitiveness, how easy it is for someone to understand your product. The third one is ease of use, so how simple it is to use the product. And the last one is satisfaction, so how much the user likes or dislikes your product. Okay, so this kind of SUS scale, it has a set of questions, so you can just reuse this kind of question sets. You can see that the SUS usability scale has 10 questions, and for each of the questions, it has 5-level scale for you to choose. Strongly disagree to strongly agree. For example, I think that I would like to use this website frequently. Strongly agree, strongly disagree, something in the middle, or so on. I thought this website was easy to use. So this is about ease of use. You can replace the word website with anything that you want to do, like application, some system, so on and so on. Okay, I felt very confident using this website. So this kind of thing assess the 4 aspects that I mentioned before. And after you have the result, you can calculate the usability score by first you add up the total odd number questions, so number 1, 3, 5, 7, and 9, and then you subtract from the total by 5, you get 1 score. The step 2 is that you add up the total score for the even number questions, so question 2, 4, 6, 8, and 10, and then you subtract the total from 25 to get the even score. And then you add up the odd and the even score, and then you multiply the sum by 2.5. Finally, you get the final SUS score in the rate of 0 to 100. So the closer to 100 is the better. And if you get something more than 60, so I think from 70 up is the best. So something more than 70, we would consider them as acceptable. But if it fall between 50 to 70, that would be marginally usable. And if it's something lower than 50, that means it is not good. It's not acceptable to use. And you might need to revise and fix the usability of your software. Okay, so I discussed a bit that the usability test should do in a lab, right? So there can be this kind of lab that we call the usability lab. And you have a room like this. The participant is here with the facilitator. And there is a window here. And it's a one-sided mirror. So the participant actually might not know that there are many people sitting on this side looking at them. And there might be some video recording as well, so that this kind of session can be watched afterwards. So you select some kind of representative sample of your user group. You might select like 3 to 5 users from each of the groups. And then you use the questionnaire to check which group that they belong to. For example, the one that are expert users, the one that are novice users, the one that might be like something like a mediumly expert user, so on and so on. So you can kind of categorize them first before they do the actual usability test. And then the participants are asked to do some kind of task. So they do some sequence of tasks. And the facilitator will observe without any interference. So they cannot help and they just observe only. Okay. So this kind of measurement that you can do are the number of mouse clicks, the number of eye movement, the time that they use. So these can be retrieved from the recording, and the observer here that are in the room can also see other body languages of the participants. Another type of usability test is accessibility testing. So accessibility helps with the people with disabilities, like people with blindness, people that has a low vision problem with their eyesight, or some people with deaf problem or color-blinded people. How can we make a software that are accessible to as many people as possible? There are some of the user accessibility guidelines that you can follow. So you can check out these W3C Web Content Accessibility Guideline. So you can select the right set of colors for your website and some of the design of the UI and everything. Okay, so this kind of thing, when you develop a really big system that are being used by millions of people around the world, you need to start thinking about accessibility, because it affects some of the users that might potentially use your software as well. Okay. The last one is called acceptance testing. So for acceptance test is the last level in the V model, where you have the delivered software and you check with the user. So that's why it's called user acceptance test. And with this, you kind of validate the software with the actual needs and constraint. Okay, so this is surely the validation of your software. So we're going to talk about the type of acceptance testing, the acceptance criteria, how we select them, what is the test plan and test execution, and finally, what is the acceptance test report. So acceptance testing is a formal testing that we do with our users to check, with the users. This is to check whether a system satisfies its acceptance criteria. Okay, this is the last step of the system development, and it is the part where you actually will hand over or deliver your software to the clients. It's also the part that the company will get paid for their service as well. So acceptance test is one of the most important milestone in the software development. The major objectives of the acceptance testing are as follows. So first, you want to confirm that the system meets the agreed upon criteria. Okay. The criteria can be just the requirements, or you might define some kind of more specific criteria as well. Second one is, if you get some problems or if you get some discrepancies, this UAT or user acceptance test will be the phase that you identify and resolve such discrepancies. And the last one is, it is a step when you determine the readiness of the system, okay, before you cut over into the live operation. Or some of the companies, I think most of the company, they use the word go live, which means the system will actually deploy and being used by the real users. Okay. The types of acceptance tests. The first one is called user acceptance test, or UAT. You hear this kind of word a lot if you go out and work, because UAT is the last phase that the software is being delivered to the users. So you will hear that we're gonna need to do UAT before we end the project, so on and so on. So UAT is a process where we assess whether the product is working to the users and it works correctly for the usage or not. Sorry. And we will use the requirements to check in the user acceptance test. So this kind of requirements, you can use it once when we do system test already. So when we do system testing, we already make sure that the system kind of satisfy all the requirements. So when you do UAT, you let the user use the system again based on the same requirements and to make sure that everything is good for them. Okay, so the UAT is the one that are frequently done, and you will find a lot in the actual industry. The second one is called business acceptance testing, or BAT. So for BAT, it mainly focuses on the business benefit. However, BAT is a bit challenging to do because there are many factors, right? Like the market conditions, some kind of new technologies that are coming out. So not all the companies will do this kind of business acceptance test, but surely they will do user acceptance testing. And the acceptance criteria can be many things, right? These are some of the example of the acceptance criteria. The system might be accepted based on the functional correctness and completeness. It might get accepted based on the accuracy, data integrity. I will just talk about some of them. Some usability, their performance, the reliability and availability, robustness, compliance with law and regulation, scalability, so on and so on. Okay, so when we actually do acceptance tests, we do not cover all of them. So you just select some of them, and the customer is the person that need to select this subset of the quality attributes. And it might get prioritized based on some specific situation. So in some of the situation, you want to launch it early on, but you want to focus mainly on the scalability of the system. So that becomes the highest priority one. For IBM, which is a big software company, they use the quality attribute list called CUPRIMDS, consists of compatibility, usability, performance, reliability, installation, maintenance, documentation, and service. Okay. And the acceptance criteria must be the one that related to their end goal, the business goal of the customer. Okay, so whatever they are thinking that having the value and it helps the company reaches their goal, that would be selected as the acceptance criteria. When we define those acceptance criteria, next is to establish a acceptance test plan. So you're going to create a plan which have the following structure. The plan will be a document outlining the introduction of the test plan, what are included, so on and so on. And then you have the test category. For each of them, you talk about their operation environment and some specific test cases. So what's the test case ID, the title, the objective, and the procedures or the steps that you will do the test. And then the schedule of this acceptance test and who needs to be involved in this kind of acceptance test. When we have the plan and we reach the data we schedule, we're going to do the acceptance test execution. So we do this kind of acceptance test by dividing the test cases into subgroup. So the first one are the basic test cases, and the second one are the complex test cases. So we do the acceptance test by starting from the basic test group first. And if everything is good, then the second phase will start with the complex test cases. But if the basic test group are not passed, then we just go back to fix those basic test cases first, and then we come back with the next one for the complex test cases. Okay. And the steps in the acceptance test execution usually follow these steps. So first, the developer will train the customer first on how to use the system. And then the developers and the customer will help to fix the problem that occur during the acceptance test. So when we find the problem, the developer will record the problem, and the customer might also need to help explaining what do they think or why it's not following the acceptance criteria that is defined. And finally, the developers and the customers will resolve the issue during any of the acceptance criteria. Okay. So after that, when the software is fixed, the test engineer will create an acceptance criteria change document so that these will be given to the users. Okay, the example is this. Okay, you have a unique number and the acceptance criteria that got affected, what is the issue, and what are the changes that are required, whether they have any impact on the technical part or not, whether they have any impact on the users or not, and who did this kind of acceptance test, who is the test engineer, and the approver, which can be the customers. Okay. So after that, they will perform the acceptance test report. So you finish everything, you kind of conclude everything as a final report, and you submit it to the users. So the acceptance test report will be sending with the delivered product. Okay, this marks the end of the development that you already delivered the software to the user. And it can be 3 potential conclusions. Accept the system as is. Okay, so this is the first one. The second one is accept the system with some modifications, and reject or do not accept the system, and the team has to rework on the product again. But usually there will be some intermediate decision before making the final decision. So when you do user acceptance test, you would already know whether this is gonna pass or not. So usually the company wouldn't proceed with the final acceptance test report if they are not sure that it's not going to be accepted. Okay. And the acceptance test report will look something like this. It has the acceptance report date, number of test cases executed, how many of them are passed, how many of them fail, and whether there are any defects or not, and links to those ACC report that we have. And the final one are the number of test cases, like the total number of test cases, how many are executed, how many passes, how many fail, and how many that are not executed yet. Okay, so in the end, you have the list of everything compiled together in a document format, which contains the report, the summary, the variants, something that are considered outside of the normal scope, summary of the result, the evaluation, some recommendations either from the team or from the users, and the summary of the activities. And finally, the signature of the customer that approved this kind of final acceptance test report. Okay, and that's pretty much about it. In this module, we discuss the system test, what is it and why is it needed? And then we also discuss some system test aspects such as the usability test, accessibility test, and at the end, I discussed the acceptance test, which is the last part of the test that we do validation before we deliver the software to the user. And that's all for this module. See you in the next module.